Welcome back to the channel. In the warm August air of 1966, on a quiet hill overlooking the city of Niterói in Brazil, a mystery began to unfold that has never truly settled. The place was Vintém Hill, a landscape of green slopes and winding footpaths, where people often went to walk, to look out at the distant water, and to breathe the wide open sky. It was the kind of place where the world felt still. But on one particular afternoon, something unusual was discovered there, something that would draw attention, speculation, and questions that have lasted for decades. The story begins with two men, Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana. They were not strangers to science or technology. Both worked as electronic technicians in a small town some distance away. They repaired radios, built custom equipment, and were known for their curiosity about how the unseen parts of the world might interact with the visible ones. They were not the kind of men who sought attention or dramatic experiences. Most who knew them described them as quiet, focused, and thoughtful. But beneath that simple exterior, there was also a fascination, an interest in the possibility that the universe might hold forms of communication beyond what ordinary instruments could detect. They were part of a small circle of experimenters who believed that certain frequencies, or electromagnetic energies, might make it possible to contact higher forms of consciousness, or perhaps signals not yet understood by mainstream science. To them, this was not fantasy. It was a project, a journey of discovery, a search for something meaningful. In mid-August, the two men left home, saying they needed to travel for work. They carried with them a small amount of money, a raincoat each, and a few personal items. There was no sign of fear, no hidden urgency. They simply went. No one who watched them leave could have imagined that it would be the last time they were seen alive. Days later, a local resident walking the hillside saw something unusual lying among the grass, two shapes, still and quiet, as though resting. When authorities arrived, they made a strange discovery. Both men lay peacefully, dressed in neat suits, covered with raincoats, and each wearing a lead mask, the kind used to shield the eyes from intense light or radiation. There were no signs of injury. No disturbance in the ground. Nothing to suggest conflict or alarm. Beside them was a small handwritten note containing brief instructions. Yet its meaning was unclear. And so, the quiet hill became a place of questions. A place where science met mystery, and certainty was replaced by silence. The world would learn of the lead mask's case, but it would not find answers. When the bodies of Manuel and Miguel were found, it was not through an organized search or a sudden alarm. Instead, it began with something ordinary, someone simply passing by. A young boy who often climbed Vintém Hill to fly kites and explore the open slopes noticed something unusual on the ground. At first, he thought it might be discarded clothing or perhaps two people resting. But the stillness was too complete. It lingered in a way that did not feel like sleep. The boy ran down to tell adults, and soon others came to see. The hill was calm that day. Birds moved through the air as usual. The sky held its quiet blue. Nothing in the environment hinted at disturbance or urgency. And yet, there the two men were lying side by side, as though they had simply laid down to watch the clouds. Their posture was peaceful. Their hands rested naturally by their sides. No visible injuries marked their bodies. There was no sign of struggle, no tracks in the earth suggesting a chase or a fall. It was as if time had simply stopped for them, mid-thought, mid-intention. The detail that caught everyone's attention first was the lead masks. Smooth, metallic, shaped to cover the upper face, like something meant to shield eyes from a powerful brightness. They were not theatrical, not decorative. They looked functional, purposeful, the kind of item someone would prepare ahead of time, something meant for a specific, intentional moment. Nearby, a small notebook lay on the grass. The writing inside was brief, without emotion, almost clinical in tone. It listed times, instructions, a short directive to take capsules, to wait, to use the masks, and finally, to observe the phenomenon. The words were simple, but they opened more questions than they answered. What phenomenon? What were they expecting to witness? Where had the capsules come from? And why perform such an act here, on this hillside, rather than in a space they controlled? Local police and investigators arrived, but the scene did not offer them much. There were no signs of robbery, no footprints suggesting other people, no belongings scattered around. Even their clothes and raincoats were clean and orderly. The absence of chaos made the mystery heavier. When something terrible happens, we expect disruption, broken objects, marks of panic, evidence of force. But here, nothing was broken except the continuation of their lives. People who lived nearby watched quietly as authorities documented the scene. Some whispered theories. Others simply observed, unsure how to understand what they were seeing. There was a sense that whatever had happened did not begin on that hill. Its roots stretched into intentions, beliefs, and decisions that were not visible from the outside. And as evening fell, Vintém Hill returned to silence. But the questions remained, waiting for a voice that never quite arrived. When investigators examined the bodies more closely, one detail stood out above almost everything else. There was no sign of struggle, no bruises, no defensive marks on the hands or arms, no torn clothing. The ground around them was undisturbed, the grass only gently pressed down where their bodies rested. It was as though the two men had simply lain down willingly, without fear, without hesitation, and allowed whatever happened next to happen. This absence of physical conflict shaped the way the case was understood from the beginning. If harm had come to them from someone else, there would usually be evidence, subtle traces of movement, impressions in the soil, marks on the skin. But there was none. Their expressions were calm. Their bodies were positioned as though they had chosen that exact place, that exact moment to be still. Such quietness can be unsettling. It suggests intention, or faith, or surrender. The road leading to that hill was steep and uneven. To reach the place where they were found, they would have had to climb for some time, carrying the masks, the raincoats, the notebook. They did not appear to have been forced. There were no drag marks, no suggestion someone had led them under threat. Every step leading to that final position seemed voluntary. This raises a simple but difficult question. What were they expecting to happen? If they believed they were about to witness something extraordinary, something bright, powerful, or overwhelming, then the lead masks begin to make sense. Protective gear is prepared before an event, not after it. They had intended to be prepared. They had prepared for an experience, not for danger. Yet the peacefulness of their bodies also opens the door to a more somber possibility. Perhaps they took something, some substance or chemical, that affected their consciousness gradually, leading them into stillness. If so, the lack of struggle may imply trust. They believed they were safe. They believed they were doing something meaningful. They believed they would return. People often associate unexplained deaths with panic, chaos, or fear. But in this case, the overwhelming impression was quiet. So quiet that it almost feels like reverence. Two men in formal suits, lying beneath the open sky, as though waiting for a signal from above. And in that stillness, the line between scientific experiment and spiritual journey becomes thin, almost transparent. It is this silence that has made the lead masks case endure. Not just the strangeness, but the calm. because stillness is harder to interpret than violence. Violence tells a story, but silence leaves space. And human beings fill that space with imagination, with belief, with mystery. On Vintém Hill, nothing spoke. Nothing explained itself. The men who might have answered the questions were no longer able to. And so the world was left with a scene that felt less like a crime and more like a pause, interrupted, unfinished, unresolved. Among all the objects found with the two men, nothing captured more attention than the lead masks. Stiff, metallic, and shaped to cover only the upper part of the face, these were not carnival masks, nor tools for industrial labor. They had no decoration, no artistic curve. They served one function: to block out intense light. These masks were the kind used by technicians working with radiation or bright electrical discharge, the kind of work both men were familiar with. They were practical, homemade, carefully cut to fit. This means the masks were not added later, not placed on them by someone else. Manuel and Miguel made these masks themselves, ahead of time, as part of a plan. The question has always been, a plan for what? To some, the mask suggests they feared a blinding light, as though they expected to witness something overwhelming, something so bright that ordinary eyes could not bear it. Light can mean many things: an energy source, a celestial event, even a symbolic revelation. But whatever they anticipated, it was something they believed would be real, physical, and visible. And they believed it strongly enough to prepare equipment for it. People familiar with the two men described them as practical, technical, and methodical. They did not act on impulse. They experimented. They calculated. They adjusted. If they made masks to block light, then they expected light that is difficult to ignore. Some have suggested that the men were attempting to contact or communicate with a signal, whether something from the sky, or something spiritual, or something technological. In the mid-1960s, there was a growing fascination around invisible waves, cosmic radiation, and the idea that the universe might contain forms of energy that could be harnessed or perceived under special conditions. For technicians like Manuel and Miguel, this was not fantasy. It was an extension of their daily work: radios, receivers, frequencies, tuning into something beyond ordinary channels. The masks may have been part of a larger experimental setup, something they believed would allow safe observation of an event that was not yet understood. There is something deeply human in that choice. To prepare for the unknown, not with fear, but with belief. They were not running from something. They were preparing to meet something. But the masks also highlight a painful irony. They were built for a moment that never came, or perhaps came in a way no one else could see. The masks remained solid, visible, dimly shining when held to light. But the thing they were meant to shield against remains invisible, unreachable, lost to time. Two masks, two men, and a question that has outlived them. What did they believe they were about to witness? The masks cannot answer, and the men cannot explain. The silence continues. The lead masks were not the only clue left behind. Near the bodies, investigators found a small, folded piece of paper. It was worn, handled many times, as though referred to during the journey. On it, in plain handwriting, were a few brief instructions. No explanations. No full sentences. Just a sequence of steps. 16. 30. Take capsules. Wait for effect. Protect metal-lead masks. After, observe the phenomenon. The note's simplicity is what makes it so haunting. There is no emotion in the words. No hesitation. No question marks. It reads like technical procedure. A checklist. Something planned. Something rehearsed. but each line opens a door into uncertainty. Take capsules suggests preparation, a substance consumed intentionally, something meant to change the state of the body or mind, perhaps to heighten perception, perhaps to calm the nerves, perhaps to facilitate what they believed would happen next. And yet, because the internal organs were never properly preserved, the exact identity of those capsules is lost forever. We will never know if they were harmless, hallucinogenic, toxic, or something else entirely. Wait for effect implies expectation. They knew the capsules would do something, and they were willing to let that change happen. It suggests trust in the process, in the outcome, in the possibility of witnessing something extraordinary. There is no sign they feared the experience. If they had been afraid, they likely would not have climbed to an open hilltop to meet it. Protect metal lead masks directly ties the masks to the event they expected. To them, the masks were not symbolic. They were practical, essential. They were preparing to shield themselves from a force they believed would be visually overwhelming, not metaphorically bright, physically bright. And finally, observe the phenomenon. That last line is the quiet heart of the mystery. It does not describe what they hoped to see. It does not define the nature of the phenomenon. It assumes that both men already understood that the meaning of the event required no additional explanation. It suggests this was not their first attempt, only the most serious. The note does not feel like the beginning of something spontaneous. It feels like the continuation of a belief they had nurtured for some time. To those outside their circle, the words feel incomplete, like listening to one side of a conversation. But to Manuel and Miguel, the note contained everything necessary. There is a softness in the tragedy here. Two men who sought knowledge, not harm, who climbed a hill to witness something they believed would expand their understanding, and who instead found silence. The note remains one of the few voices left in the story, a voice that speaks clearly, yet explains nothing. A set of instructions for an event that no one else saw. And the hill, quiet as ever, keeps the rest. Their preparations, the masks, and the note begin to make more sense when viewed alongside another part of their lives, one that did not always appear in public. Manuel and Miguel were more than just technicians. They were part of a small, quiet circle of individuals who believed that the universe might contain forms of communication beyond what ordinary instruments could detect. Radio signals, electromagnetic waves, frequencies. These were familiar tools to them, and it was within these tools that they believed a doorway might exist. To many people, radio repair work is simple: wires, circuits, tuning, adjustments. But to someone who listens closely, radio waves are invisible pathways, lines of connection between distances, minds, and moments in time. For some, those pathways inspire curiosity. For others, they awaken belief. Manuel and Miguel belong to the latter category. They believed that if the world held unseen frequencies, perhaps consciousness could travel along them. Perhaps signals did not need to come only from human sources. In the 1960 seconds, this curiosity was not unusual. It was a time when people around the world were fascinated by the idea of life beyond Earth. Space exploration was advancing, technology was accelerating, and the boundary between science and the unknown felt thinner than ever. Groups formed quietly. People who met not to perform rituals, but to experiment. They believed that with the right devices, the right frequencies, and the right state of mind, one might be able to perceive something extraordinary. For Manuel and Miguel, this was not fantasy. It was a project they worked on slowly, carefully, patiently. They built devices. They collected diagrams. They took notes. They spoke with others who were curious in the same way. They were earnest, not reckless, not theatrical. They approached the unknown the same way they approached electronics, step by step, adjustment by adjustment. This is why the note felt so natural to them, why the masks were made with care, why the hill was chosen as a place to wait. They believed they were preparing to witness something, not to escape life, not to harm themselves, but to reach for an understanding that seemed just beyond the edge of ordinary experience. And in that belief, there is something deeply human, the desire to see what others cannot, to listen where silence is expected, to trust that reality is larger than what we already know. Their families later recalled how they spoke about energy and presence, about signals and perception, with a quiet seriousness, not as dreamers, but as men searching for something real. They were not running from their lives. They were reaching toward something they hoped was waiting. What they sought remains unknown. What they believed they were about to see remains unspoken. But the intention behind their journey was not chaos or fear, it was curiosity. A curiosity that led them up a hill, under an open sky, toward a horizon they thought might finally speak. And instead, the world stayed silent. The deeper one looks into their lives, the clearer it becomes that Manuel and Miguel were not merely experimenting with equipment. They were exploring the boundaries of perception itself. To them, communication was not limited to human voices or familiar radio signals. They believed the universe might hold forms of consciousness that could be reached if one tuned correctly, waited patiently, and aligned the mind with a certain state of awareness. They were not alone in this belief. In the mid-20th century, there were quiet circles of experimenters and spiritual enthusiasts across South America who believed technology could be used to bridge the gap between the physical and the unseen. Some believed that intelligent signals traveled through cosmic radiation. Others believed higher awareness could be triggered if the mind entered an altered state while surrounded by electromagnetic fields. And for a few, the idea of contacting beings not of this world did not feel impossible. It felt like a frontier waiting to be understood. For Manuel and Miguel, these ideas were not abstract philosophy. They were goals. They had already attempted smaller experiments. People close to them recalled evenings when they set up homemade antenna systems and spoke in low voices about transmissions that did not resemble ordinary radio chatter. They discussed timing, voltage, atmospheric conditions, and states of concentration. Their approach was structured curiosity with direction. And this is important. They did not behave like people seeking escape or spectacle or thrill. Their behavior was more like researchers preparing for a test. Whatever they believed was coming on that hill, they believed it would be something real, something perceivable, something they could witness and possibly interact with. Their preparations were not dramatic. They were practical. For them, the unknown did not represent chaos. It represented possibility. So when they climbed Vintém Hill, they did so with a kind of quiet conviction. They brought masks to protect their eyes, raincoats to shield their clothing, and instructions to guide their steps. They were preparing to see something they believed could change their understanding of reality. Maybe they thought it would be a moment of revelation. Maybe they thought it would confirm everything they had worked toward. Maybe they thought they would come back home afterward, able to describe the experience to others. The tragedy is not just that they never returned, but that the thing they expected to encounter remains unidentified, unshared, unspoken. Whatever they were waiting to witness never became visible to anyone else. Their belief was the bridge they chose to walk across, and the hill was the place where that bridge ended. Not with chaos, not with terror, but with a silence so complete that it has echoed for decades. The world still does not know whether they were reaching for something real or something that lived only in their hopes. But the sincerity of the attempt is undeniable. They truly believed the universe was ready to speak, and they went to listen. One of the most significant reasons the mystery has endured is something deceptively simple. The bodies were not examined in time. When the authorities recovered Manuel and Miguel from the hillside, the temperature was high, the air was humid, and decomposition set in quickly. The organs, which are the key to determining whether any substance was consumed and in what amount, were already deteriorating. Procedures were different then. Preservation methods were limited. And in the rush of practical decisions, the internal organs were not stored for analysis. When the question of toxins, chemicals, or psychedelic compounds was finally raised, it was already too late. The very evidence that could have provided clarity had slipped away. This absence created a kind of quiet void in the investigation. If chemicals were involved, they could explain the calmness of the bodies, the lack of struggle, the orderly posture. They could clarify whether the men entered a trance-like state or whether their hearts simply failed. They could confirm whether the capsules mentioned in the note were harmless or dangerous. But without those samples, the cause of death could not be confirmed. And once that possibility disappeared, speculation began to fill the empty space left behind. Some imagined a voluntary journey, something like a meditative transition, guided by belief rather than fear. Others believed an accidental overdose was more likely, a miscalculation in dosage during their experiment. There were also those who wondered whether something or someone may have been involved, shaping the event from the background. Without toxicology, all of these possibilities remain equally open. When questions cannot be answered scientifically, they tend to drift. They move into rumor, interpretation, and the quiet corners of imagination. And that is what happened here. The case did not close neatly. It simply stopped moving. The lack of toxicology did more than obscure the cause of death. It also cut the bridge that might have explained their intentions. If the capsules were part of a controlled experiment, the event shifts into the realm of scientific curiosity gone wrong. If the capsules were something else, something designed to alter consciousness or perception, the event moves into a symbolic or spiritual pursuit. And if no capsules were involved at all, the note itself becomes an enigma. Because that evidence is missing, the story remains suspended. Two men lying still on a hill, masks over their eyes, waiting for something we cannot now identify. There is a quiet ache in that uncertainty. We do not know whether they were on the verge of discovery or simply the victims of an experiment misunderstood. We do not know whether their final moments were filled with wonder, confusion, or peace. All we know is that the answers were once inside, their bodies held softly in the organs that might have spoken, and now, like the moment they waited for, those answers are gone. The silence holds steady. When officials eventually closed the case, their conclusion was brief and practical. The two men likely died during an experiment they conducted themselves. No deeper explanation was given. No attempt to interpret the meaning of the masks or the note. The deaths were labeled accidental, the result of their own choices. And with that, the investigation was allowed to fade. But an official conclusion is not the same as an answer. The idea of a failed experiment suggests that Manuel and Miguel were reaching for something, testing a method, repeating a procedure, following a sequence of steps that they believed would reveal something extraordinary. Yet the authorities never clarified what the experiment was intended to accomplish. There was no evidence of external coercion, no signs of threat, and no indication that another party forced them up the hill. The law, at least on paper, saw no crime to pursue. Still, the simplicity of the conclusion created a kind of hollow space. If this was truly an experiment, what was the hypothesis? What did they believe they were about to witness? And why did they believe the masks and the capsules would help them do so? The report left these questions untouched, as though they belonged to another realm too intangible for legal language too speculative for official statements. In the years that followed, the idea of a failed experiment became less an explanation and more a frame, one that people filled with their own interpretations. Some saw two men, driven by earnest curiosity, guided by hope rather than caution. Others saw misguided trust, a belief in something that could not be measured or observed. And still others saw the story as a quiet tragedy, two minds reaching for a horizon that remained just out of sight. The official conclusion also carried another implication. There would be no further investigation. Once the deaths were categorized as accidental, the case no longer demanded resources, attention, or follow-up. Whatever led the men to that hill, whatever inspired the construction of those masks, the writing of that note was no longer considered a matter for the law. And so, the story settled into public memory, not as a case with a solution, but as a puzzle left deliberately unfinished. There is something solemn about this ending. The authorities did not claim to know the truth. They simply placed a boundary around the mystery and stepped back. The lack of definitive answers did not trouble the system, because the system requires closure, not understanding. The world moved on. The files grew old. The hillside remained quiet. But the absence of certainty continued to whisper. A failed experiment suggests intention without reward, effort without outcome, a reaching motion that never found its mark. What remains is the sense that Manuel and Miguel believed deeply in something that could not be captured in words, reports, or evidence, something they hoped to see with their own eyes. And instead, the world saw only the masks. In the space left by the official explanation, speculation began to grow. When a story ends without answers, the human mind continues it on its own. And this story, already marked by unusual details, the masks, the note, the calmness, invited possibilities that stretched beyond the ordinary. One of the most enduring theories suggested that the two men believed they were preparing to witness or communicate with something not of this world. The idea was not created out of sensationalism. It grew from fragments of conversation remembered by family and friends, moments when Manuel and Miguel spoke with quiet conviction about signals, lights, and a kind of awareness greater than human perception. In these recollections, there is no drama, just sincerity. That sincerity is what keeps the theory alive. Others imagine that the event involved altered states of consciousness. In the 1,960 seconds, across the world, there was a growing interest in substances believed to open the mind, expand perception, or unlock spiritual insight. Some speculated that the capsules mentioned in the note were part of such a process, an attempt to reach a threshold where the mind could sense energies or frequencies that are normally hidden. If this was true, then the masks and the hill were not symbols, but tools. They were preparing to see. Another theory suggests something quieter and more grounded, that Manuel and Miguel were experimenting with electromagnetic fields they did not fully understand. If their device or method involved a burst of radiation or intense light, the masks would have served as protection. In this version, the tragedy becomes almost gentle. They were not chasing the impossible, but simply misjudging the risks of something very real. And then, of course, there are those who believe in interference from an unseen force, not dramatic, not violent, just a presence that did not reveal itself in ways the living could interpret. In these tellings, the hill becomes a threshold, a place where the sky and the earth touch, where something passed close and then was gone. Yet the most striking thing is that none of these theories feel sensational when placed against the quiet reality of the scene. Two men lying peacefully. No fear, no struggle, no disorder. If panic had been present, these theories would feel exaggerated. But there was no panic, only stillness. And it is that stillness that makes speculation feel less like wild imagination and more like an effort to understand a moment that refuses to explain itself. The truth may have been vast, or it may have been simple, but without the men to speak it, the story became a mirror, reflecting whatever each person believes about the unknown. The masks remain, the note remains, the hill remains. Everything else continues quietly in the space between possibility and silence. With time, more theories emerged, but each explained only part of the story, never the whole. One theory might account for the masks, but not the note. Another could explain the note, but not the absence of struggle. A third might describe the capsules, yet failed to explain why the men went to the hill at that exact moment. Every interpretation carried weight, but none settled into certainty. This is often how mysteries survive, not because no one has thought deeply enough, but because the pieces refuse to fit together in a single, complete shape. If the event was purely scientific, why choose an open hillside rather than a controlled environment? If it was spiritual, why rely on equipment instead of ritual? If it was accidental poisoning, why were the men so calm, so orderly in their final posture? And if there was no external force, why does the scene feel so intentionally composed? Each question leads to another. Each answer leaves something untouched. The mystery remains, in part, because the scene does not look like death born of fear or confusion. There is no sign of last-minute desperation, no marks of panic. The two men seem to meet their final moment with acceptance or perhaps anticipation. The masks were placed carefully. The note was written clearly. Their clothes were neat, their bodies unguarded. It was as though they believed they were preparing for an encounter, not an ending. This calmness unsettles the mind. We are used to thinking of the unknown as something frightening, but the lead mask's case suggests something else, the unknown as something approached willingly, something awaited. When a mystery involves violence, people tend to search for justice. But when a mystery involves quiet conviction, people search for meaning. And meaning is harder to pursue because it does not leave fingerprints, footprints, or chemical traces. It leaves only atmosphere. And so the story lived on not as a case to be solved, but as a question to be carried. Documentaries, articles, investigations, and discussions have returned again and again to the hillside, to the masks, to the words on the note. Yet each retelling acknowledges the same truth. The heart of the mystery rests inside the intentions of two men who can no longer speak. What they believed and why they believed it remain sealed. The masks sit like symbols not because they were meant to be symbols, but because they were never explained. The note reads like a message, not because it was written to others, but because it survives after its authors are gone. The hill stands like a quiet witness, not offering answers, only holding the memory of two figures lying under the open sky. Some mysteries endure because they resist closure. Others endure because they carry a gentleness that feels deeper than explanation. This one endures because it feels like both. And so, after the reports were filed, after the last conversations faded, after the masks were stored away and the hillside returned to its ordinary quiet, the case simply stopped. No breakthroughs emerged. No hidden witnesses stepped forward. No overlooked evidence resurfaced. Time continued, and the world shifted around the story, but the mystery did not move. It remained where it began on Vintém Hill, under the open sky. More than half a century has passed, and what remains now is not a case waiting to be solved, but a space, an open, quiet space, where answers could have been, but never arrived. The men who might have explained their intentions are gone. The physical evidence that could have clarified their final hours has long since decayed. Those who knew them, who might have added context or nuance, have aged and passed on. Even the memories are fading at the edges. The lead mask's case endures not because it is dramatic, but because it is calm. Because it does not tell us how to feel. Because it refuses to lean toward any one conclusion. The story offers just enough detail to show intention, but not enough to define it. A note. 2 masks. A. Quiet Hill. There, Fretter. 2 men lying side by side as though watching something we cannot see. And then nothing. In this emptiness, there is a kind of dignity. They were not defined by chaos, or scandal, or fear. They were defined by seeking. They climbed a hill in the belief that they would meet something meaningful. And whatever that meaning was, it did not leave an imprint that the rest of the world could read. There was a softness in imagining their last moments, not as confusion, but as anticipation. The air warm, the sky open, the masks resting lightly over their eyes, the world quiet around them. Maybe they believed that something would appear, a light, a signal, a voice, a presence. Maybe they thought they were on the threshold of understanding. Or maybe they simply miscalculated something small, something invisible, something that changed everything. We do not know. And perhaps that is why the story has remained alive for so long. It does not force belief. It invites reflection. It stands as a reminder that curiosity can be a powerful, gentle, and sometimes dangerous thing. That the desire to see beyond the visible can lead to beautiful questions and quiet endings. There are no final answers here, only the outline of 2 lives reaching towards something vast. The hill is still there, quiet, ordinary. The path remains. The wind moves through the grass. And somewhere in that stillness, the story remains, not asking to be solved, only to be remembered. 2 men went in search of a light. No one else could see. In the end, the lead mask's case remains one of those stories that stands quietly outside the boundaries of explanation, not because it is full of chaos, but because it is made of calm, deliberate steps whose meaning has slipped beyond our reach. 2 men prepared for something they believed would change what they understood about the world. They climbed a hill purposefully, carrying masks, instructions, and trust in the unknown. And whatever happened there, it happened without violence, without panic, without struggle, only silence. Mysteries like this remind us that not all unanswered questions are loud. Some are soft. Some simply rest in the space between intention and outcome, where belief and uncertainty meet. And while we may never know what Manuel and Miguel hope to witness, the presence of their story continues not as a riddle demanding solution, but as a quiet reflection on how deeply human it is to seek meaning beyond what we already know. Thank you for spending this time here, in this quiet space, tracing a story that has lingered for decades. If you found this gentle, calming, or thought-provoking, I invite you to stay for more stories where history is not rushed, where mystery is allowed to breathe, and where curiosity is treated with care. For now, rest well. May your night be peaceful, and may the unanswered remain gentle. Good night.